Please be seated. Apparently, I need to talk to Alex because the menu for today was listed as the sermon title. That's a joke. See if anybody read what the sermon title was there, right there. Locusts and honey. John the Baptist is an interesting figure, and I like to again explain some of the context of what's going on because we're usually somewhat familiar with the story as presented in Scripture, right? It's not weird to us. It's what happens. It's part of a progression in a story that we've already been told, and it seems normal. There is within most world religions a concept of purity, of what is clean, and what is clean is normally understood as godly, what is pure, what is sanctified, and then there is what is dirty, and that is normally understood to be things that are not holy. John the Baptist isn't simply putting on water, he's cleaning. He's a cleanup. He's a guy who's walking around telling people they are good with God through washing. Certainly in his day, it was a full-body watered immersion. Many churches, many religions use ceremonial washing, little tiny drops of water, whether it be on a forehead, on hands, on feet, to signify this kind of cleansing and purity and being right with God. The thing to remember is that John the Baptist is doing this in a temple worshiping community. It's a place where if you want to get right with God, you have an expectation of bringing a certain number of birds or oxen or grain or something to the temple that is then sacrificed, and only at that time do you become pure. Now, certainly even to enter the temple, you have to do the initial washing. But all of that is done at the temple. And where is John? John is not at the temple. John is outside the temple, in the wilderness, in fact, outside the city even. You have to commute. And if you commute to John to get clean, and then commute to the temple, guess what happens? You get dirty again. So for people to go out there, it doesn't even give them entrance into the temple where they can do their sacrifice. It is a bizarre action in many ways, because it's like looking away from the place you normally look in order to have a relationship with God. It's an outside place. From John's words, we understand that this is only an outside action also. Much like trying to gain entrance into the temple where you were supposed to wash before going into the temple, John is that exact same thing. He is a cleansing before the coming of Christ. He is an outward cleaning before seeking an inward atonement. Now, our reading this morning, our first reading, talks about the mountains being made low and the valleys being made high so that everything's flat. You can get around. Anyone who had to walk to church this morning probably would appreciate that, right? Having to get up Beacon Hill. What's important to note is that the reading is not actually saying that we shouldn't have beautiful vistas. It's not actually announcing that all the hills should be made low and all the valleys should rise. It's really just announcing that the places where you're going to walk. It's really talking about building a road, and not that every mountain would go down. It's talking about how do you get from one place to another. It's talking about preparing for a journey so it's not as difficult. Now, I don't know if you realized what happened right after all of these things were going to be happen, where the mountain was going to be made low and the valley was going to be made high. We're told to go to a high place immediately after that. In the stanza immediately following that everything's going to be leveled, we're told to go to a high place. But if everything was just leveled, how do you do that? It's kind of confusing. What's being discussed here with all this altitude is simply, how do you get close to God? How do you have a connection with God? How do you prepare yourself to be a better person? How do you do what John is doing to prepare the way for God to enter your heart and to transform your soul? A reading from Swedenborg today, for anybody who found it incredibly dense, is a relatively simple reading. He just restates it over and over again. There's an inside and an outside. And we can make our outside do whatever we want our outside to do, and we can feel however we want on the inside. We can give a nice fake smile while being really angry on the inside. We can pretend like we care about something, even when we don't. There's lots of things that we can do to make it so our inside and our outside don't match. In fact, kids, I don't know if you heard that statement. When a person was old enough, Swedenborg said, they have an inner and an outside self. He kind of argues that young kids don't. Their inner and outside is kind of just all there. And anyone who's worked with young kids knows that young kids, babies, through the age where they learn how to lie, they wear their emotions, they wear their inside. There is no difference. If they're upset, they just cry. They haven't learned yet, how do I swallow it up? But we learn these things. We learn how to separate what we're feeling and what we're thinking from what we're doing. We learn how to not tell the truth. How about that? We learn how to lie about what's going inside us, what's going on inside us, because we learn it's really vulnerable to have people have that kind of power over us. The funny thing is, then we spend the rest of our life trying to figure out how to unlearn it. How to have relationships with other people when what's inside of ourselves isn't on the surface what's going on. What we do matters. How do we grow spiritually is that we have to level certain things out. We have the ability to understand what is right. We have the ability to think we are better than we actually are in our heart. Now, someone might sit here and say to ourselves, wow, this ability to lie is certainly our undoing. But what if it actually plays a very special role? Because think about it. If you can't have a separation between what's inside and what's outside, how do you grow? How do you begin to understand about who you should be and determine whether or not you love it? My daughter, if she had her choice, she would live her entire life underneath her blanket. Never talking to anyone over the age of 18. If you're over the age of 18, you make young kids uncomfortable no matter how much you don't want to. It's just true. Yes, choir, you're getting old. Young kids don't like talking to older people. It wigs them out. There's a certain age where they love them. Young kids, they don't care. Then they hit this age where all of a sudden, anyone who's older wigs them out. The inside and the outside starts playing, starts causing difficulties. And they, at this age, start trying to figure out, what is it that I think? What is it that I understand? What is it that I believe? And we continue to struggle with this for the rest of our lives. What the Lord is telling us with John the Baptist in the story here is that we have an obligation. We have an obligation, if we know that we can think about things differently than how we feel about them, what should we do? We should really start at some point asking ourselves, do I like what I am thinking about? Do I like what I am choosing to do? Is the stuff, or is that single or is it are the stuff? Is the stuff? Ooh, that's difficult.
Is the stuff.
Is the stuff that I do stuff that will get me where I want to go? I once had a friend who kept hanging out in my living room talking to me about having problems meeting women, and I looked at him and I said, Rob, you're not going to meet any in my living room. You got to get out. You got to do things. You got to ask yourself, how do I get involved with where I want to go? If you want to be a good person, if you want to be a loving person, if you want to be a person that fits into a certain picture of who is good, what are you doing to get there? Going to the mall? Do people go to malls anymore? Shopping on Amazon? I don't know. The average thing that we do during the week as kind of average life, guess what? It probably, for most people, isn't leading them where they think it's leading. Most of the things we do are about our entertainment. What do we do in a given week to create a space, intellectually and through our action, to prepare ourselves to actually have an encounter with God? We focus on ourselves all week long, but don't worry, we sit down and maybe do a prayer once or twice a week and say, God, why aren't you working for me? When you put it like that, it kind of sounds silly. What does it mean to prepare a way? It means that we have to look at our lives and look at the valleys and hills that we are walking on and prepare the road. We have to level the playing field by creating places. I like to think, by the way, this is why it's important to go to church. Ideally, church is a place where we have a possibility of looking at our lives and growing. Ideally, a message that's about love, compassion, how do I live better? There's very few places like church left in this world. I guess you can go to self-help groups and other places, but you don't go to work and find a statement of how do I become a better person. You normally have questions of what does it mean to increase efficiency and hit benchmark measures. Those benchmark measures might be about sales, they might be about so many different things. But you go home, and I don't know about you, but my home is, my gosh, can I walk through the living room today? That's my measure for whether or not I'm being successful. Is the house clean enough that I don't step on something in the middle of the night? What are the things that we do? The groups that we join? How are they helping us become a better person? See, John the Baptist comes before the Lord to prepare a way, to open the ears. And he lets us know that after him, someone else will be coming to grant the Spirit. We do not get the Spirit before we get the container. If we don't create a spot, the Lord can't fill it. If we don't say, how am I going to love people more this week, and start doing it, even when we're not feeling the connection, we don't have the opportunity to feel the Spirit working through us. What we do matters. The outside of us, the things that we do, the actions matter. As we face this Advent season, my question is, what does it mean for you to not only prepare the way of the Lord, but to prepare the way for the person you want to be? What are the opportunities you are doing? How are you stepping outside of your normal city? The place where you normally sacrifice, the place where you normally clean yourself. To go out into the wilderness to experience the parts of life that you don't normally look at. What are you doing to prepare ye the way of the Lord? Amen.